You were born into a Mormon family.
I was.
And you were raised Mormon and
yes.
pretty heavily involved in the Mormon church for a while.
Yeah. You know, when people think of Mormon and like most Mormons they know of, that wasn't really my family, the way we did it. The
Really?
level of dedication was... I would say it was very similar to a lot of experiences that I've heard from cult survivors. It wasn't anything like super extreme with like maybe what you see in like documentaries and stuff like that. But the more and more I learn about cults, the more I'm like, wow, that was very much like kind of the dynamic that was present within my family environment, because everything revolved around God and our specific religion. Everything we did, like all the conversations, all the decisions, it was all, you know, like for church on Sunday, we would spend like 5 to 7 hours there. And then throughout the week, it would be like, I don't know, like 6 hours of church activities throughout the week as well.
Oh my gosh.
Just, it was very, very devoted. Wow. But I will say, I was always the black sheep of the family who was like, this, I don't want this. I don't like this. Yeah. It's not personally my thing, but.
Are you an only child?
No, so I have 4 siblings.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've talked a little bit about what that was like, feeling like you had to kind of hide who you really were during those years. And I'm sure that was really hard to do, kind of like wearing a mask in a way.
Yeah, because it was kind of a 2-part suppression, because there was obviously the part of myself that, you know, recognized I'm gay, you know, and being raised in a very, not only religious environment, but very conservative, closed-minded environment as well, not only with my family, but my community. Obviously that led to a pretty intense level of suppression. But there was also the other part of me who didn't identify with the religious teachings that were constantly present within my home environment. And because it was so dominant, and that's all the conversations and the focus was for so long, I definitely, from a young age, was just like, I don't even know who I am. This is, you know, I have to hide everything about myself, suppress everything, pretend to be someone else completely. Hence the, you know, mental health issues that we discussed on my podcast. You know, it was difficult. But at the same time, I am grateful for a lot of the ways in which I was raised, because I think, you know, we grew up kind of in the middle of nowhere with very little money at all. Being raised in that suppressive of an environment has made me gain such an appreciation for my own like self-expression and personal freedom.
Absolutely.
That I'm experiencing now, and just to be able to have my own life separated from that, it's just been so liberating, such a joy. So good and bad.
How many years did you feel like you had to hide your sexuality? Like, when did you know?
So I remember recognizing when I was pretty young, like 5 or 6 years old. And it wasn't because I was like, ooh, I like men, but it was more so because in the Mormon church, there's a heavy emphasis on getting married in the temple, being sealed together forever. Families are forever, having children, all that kind of stuff. So from the day I was born, that was, you know, the messages were constantly revolving around that, in terms of like, this is your life plan kind of laid out for you. This is the life God wants for you. And this is what's going to happen. And so I remember when I was 5 or 6 years old, like my parents telling me that I was going to get married in the temple to a woman and have children and stuff. And I was just like, I don't want that. Like, that is completely opposite of what I want. And I remember being like, okay, I don't want to get married to a woman. I could see myself married to a guy, but like, what the hell is that? Yeah. I'm like, okay. And for the majority of my adolescence, it was just like push away any thoughts or feelings of, you know, recognizing that I am gay, because it just was something that I couldn't really cope with in the moment and in the environment that I was in, because I knew my personal safety, not only emotionally, but physically, could be compromised if I were to ever allow myself to even like fully think about that, let alone accept that and, you know, share it with the people around me.
How old were you when you decided like, oh, this isn't something that's just going to go away, that I can push away? Like, I have to actually kind of work through this.
I remember, because I remember like first mentioning to my mom a little bit. I remember she had said to me like, Hyram, are you, attracted to any girls? Like, are there any girls that you have a crush on? When I was in middle school, and I was just like, no. And honestly, I don't want a girlfriend. I didn't say I was gay or anything. I was just like, I'm just an independent person. I don't want a girlfriend, blah, blah, blah. Mm. And she was like, oh, you'll change your mind. You'll come around.
Mm.
And I was like, I will prove her wrong.
No, I won't.
And I did. I guess I proved her wrong. When I was in high school, I remember being like, okay, this is not going away. This is not just like a phase or, whatever they say. This is something that is a part of me. But I wasn't really able to accept that until I moved away from home and went to college, because that's where I was able to, I was in Hawaii, so I was in a much more open-minded environment, where, I didn't hear and see homophobia just occurring literally in front of me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But it also gave me the space away from negative influences and family to be able to reconcile with that and figure out what my identity was.
So the reason you moved to Hawaii was for college?
Originally, yes.
Okay.
But at that point, I hadn't initially planned on going to college. I just wanted to get out. I was like, get me out of this house, get me out of this town. I need to leave ASAP. And I thankfully was able to go to college, and that's when inspired the move to Hawaii.
Was there anyone where you grew up who was gay and out that you could see and be inspired by, or did that just not exist at all?
There was one person I knew of, only one in my high school, and he had been raised in a pretty liberal environment in a different state somewhere else and had moved in.
Wow.
And
that's hard.
Yeah, which was rough because my town is just extremely difficult. Thankfully, the high school environment I was in was relatively I didn't see a lot of, of course there was casual homophobia, but there wasn't life-threatening level homophobia there. And so everyone was pretty accepting of him. And I was able to connect with him and kind of ask him questions, purely objectively, tell me about your experience of being gay. But thankfully he didn't have too negative of an experience. I was able to kind of see him be his authentic self and become inspired by that. But I think because there was just so many ties to my family and people I had grown up with, and it was still actively, heavily discouraged in my church. There was just no possibility of me ever being able to come out while I was living at home. But I was able to come out a few years later publicly.
So when you first went to Hawaii, you went to a Christian university, right?
I did.
So it was a little bit of freedom, but that was still had its own challenges.
It did. And primarily because the school I went to had a very intense honor code, they called it, where you had to, in order to keep going to school there, you had to follow these ethical responsibilities. So being gay was not it was just not accepted at all. So that was also difficult. But thank God I was in Hawaii, which Hawaii is so open-minded, so liberal.
Yeah.
That's great.
That people were very accepting of that. But even in my, college experience, I was like, oh my gosh, I still can't fully be authentic to myself. I still can't be open about this.
And that's so sad, because especially in college, when you're really trying to find out who you are and what your life is, you want it to be like, and the person you want to be, to not be able to feel like you can safely explore that is
very unfortunate.
So unfortunate. Yeah.
I know. And especially in an environment where the whole purpose of going to college is to educate yourself, become more open-minded, learn more about other people in the world. It's just ironic, at some point. And that's one of the big reasons I inevitably dropped out. I mostly dropped out because I was super broke. But I was almost homeless.
What were you studying?
So I was studying international cultural studies, entrepreneurship, and anthropology. So it was kind of
cool.
3-tiered pursuit. It was amazing. I loved my study, but the social environment and the inclusivity as far as openness to gay people at that time was just very not great. So leaving school was a huge step forward. And when I was really able to publicly come out and really fully be authentic, really only came after college. And that was 6 years ago.
Can I ask what your family's response to that was?
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately not positive.
Yeah.
And it depends on the family member, but for my parents, they essentially disowned me when I came out to them. It was a sad experience because I had tried to go back home to live with them for a short time in order to kind of repair the relationship, and that's when I was able to fully come out to them, and I thought it was going to go super well. I had these kind of like dream ambitions of like, oh, they'll love me, they'll accept me, sort of thing. But they made it very clear that if I was to choose to be gay, as it was said in their eyes, that I would not have a place as their son, and I would not have a place in their lives. So it was very disappointing.
So
unfortunately.
traumatic.
Yeah, it was rough, but I really like to look on the bright side because I think I was able to go through the experience of finding my chosen family, I feel so lucky to be able to pick the people I want to have as my family.
Absolutely.
Who are the most supportive, most loving, because you don't always see that. And especially in the gay community, there's so many people I know who still have to deal with their very toxic, homophobic, unaccepting, closed-minded family members. And I think for me, like, it was, as much as it was a bad experience, I am, at some level grateful for it because it led to me having such a beautiful chosen family that I do
that's
today.
a really wonderful way of thinking about it.
Amazing, yeah.
Sometimes you got to focus on the positive to get through.
For sure.
the difficulty of it,
Absolutely.
Oh, I was just going to ask if you've had any different experience with your siblings.
Oh,
Yeah. So with my siblings, it depends on the sibling, but there was definitely a lot more support. And good. I think that comes from, we're just younger, different generation, more acceptance. I think with my parents, it was just, I think they're just too far gone, between religion, between a home environment, community, the way they were raised. I just think it was just, there wasn't really hope there. But for my siblings, there's definitely been a lot more acceptance. So
that's good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that.
It's been good. But honestly, even though it was a hard decision, I felt like my life really began once I was able to come out because it wasn't just an expression of sexuality. It was full, just open self-expression, unapologetically being able to show yourself to the world in every capacity,
which I feel like is the thing that every single person deserves and should have, but unfortunately it's just not the reality in so many situations, which is so unfair.
So I'm guessing you have no relation at any point with the Mormon church now or the religion. Okay.